Pfizer's COVID vaccine has full FDA approval, but what does that actually mean? By the way, those plastic dividers at salons and restaurants, not really stopping the spread of the virus, according to a new study. The Paralympics kicks off today in Tokyo, and if you like a good hot dog at a summer barbecue, well, you might want to turn this podcast off a bit early today. Tuesday Need to Know. Let's go. Good morning, this is Cheddar's Need to Know podcast for Tuesday, August 24th. I am Jill with Baker Machado. Carlo is still off. Baker, I feel like we are really covering a host of different topics today. They really run the gamut here.
Jill, you know, all I want to talk about is how much of my life I've lost to hot dogs. Of course, we'll get to that later on, but you know that is the number one story on my agenda today.
All right, so let's get to the news first so we can have plenty of time to talk hot dogs. The FDA officially approving Pfizer's 2-dose COVID-19 vaccine for people 16 and older, which makes it the first vaccine to move beyond emergency use status in the U.S. So what does this mean? Okay, it is based on a clinical trial of 44,000 people. And after a 6-month follow-up period, Pfizer says that the vaccine is 91% effective at preventing severe cases of COVID-19. Pfizer is going to be following the participants for about 2 years. According to the Washington Post, once you get that full approval, it lasts indefinitely unless there are unexpected side effects. Moderna had filed for full approval in June. So the process, though, takes a minute. So we're not sure when they're going to be granted full approval. Johnson & Johnson has not yet applied. They're going to apply for full approval later this year. The question, though, as we talked about yesterday, Baker, is this going to move the needle when it comes to the vaccine hesitant? We'll see. The real impact may be in encouraging more companies and local governments to mandate vaccinations, which we've already started to see happen.
Absolutely, Jill. Then that's what we really insinuated yesterday on the podcast, and I think it's spot on. We've seen companies like United Airlines already basically start mandating vaccines. Chevron is now doing that in the oil and gas industry earlier this morning. And also yesterday, New York City announced that all public school teachers and staffers will now have to be vaccinated in order to teach or work once class begins next month. Now, notably, Jill, the city isn't allowing people to opt out and just get tested. Some of those other companies have sort of had that opt-out policy. The Pentagon even saying that the country's 1.3 million active duty service members would be required to get the shot no later than the middle of September. And essentially, it gives you the legal protection effectively to say, look, if it's FDA approved, you now basically can mandate this and gives you legal protection. The other aspect in all of this as well, and you actually interviewed one of my favorite infectious disease specialists, Dr. Amish Adalja from Johns Hopkins today on Wake Up with Cheddar. He brought up another really big point, which a lot of people aren't talking about, which is when something is emergency use authorized and approved from that aspect, the government is basically the one that is doing the shots, figuring out who is the most at risk, and is basically, organizing all of this. When it's full FDA approved, that means your doctor now, your nurse, all those other sorts of people that you see in terms of your general practitioners, they can now effectively give you the shot as well. So this, even though FDA approval might not move the needle too much in terms of more people getting the shot and getting vaccinated, we have seen in some polls out there that a lot of people feel comfortable going and talking to their doctor about the vaccine and whether or not it's safe and healthy for them. Even conservatives, Republicans who are basically saying, listen, if you don't want to get the vaccine, at least talk to your doctor. So even if it's now FDA approved, the doctor at least has the shot right there next to them if they're going to give somebody that shot.
It's such a great point because that even forgetting even COVID, think about how many times you've been to the doctor and they're like, all right, I need you to go do this follow up here
Correct.
with X, Y, and Z. And you're like, okay, see you never. I mean, because even, it's just another hurdle. So I think that you make a great point in terms of the logistics of it. Okay, in terms of COVID cases, some good news. It does appear that the Delta COVID wave in Florida has peaked. The death toll, though, has now hit a 7-day record high. We know that deaths do tend to lag cases. Now, when it comes to kids, unfortunately, people under the age of 18, those cases have not peaked. In fact, they're still going up, and that's partly because school now back in session. Want to mention again, for 12 to 15-year-olds, Pfizer still emergency use authorization. FDA is waiting for some more data on that because it just takes time, right? It wasn't approved for emergency use for 12 to 15-year-olds until after it was approved for people older than 15. So that's what you're looking at. It's not like they feel like it's not ready for FDA approval. They just really need the data, and they don't have it because it's relatively new. No timeline for when the vaccine will be approved for kids under 12. The government had asked these pharmaceutical companies to double the sample size, and that's part of the holdup here.
Yeah, and by the way, on the topic of when we might get this approved for children, Jill, Dr. Anthony Fauci was on the Today Show this morning. He said potentially they're looking at a vaccine approval for children maybe early fall, early winter. The other big news here, Dr. Fauci said, is we might be returning to a sense of quote unquote normalcy. And I'm saying that in quotes because we were supposed to be normal this spring. He's looking at it at spring 2022. But that's if, of course, everybody gets vaccinated. But Jill, as you mentioned, the number's still crazy. We're still averaging 150,000 new COVID cases per day for over a week now. The expectation is about 200,000 cases per day, potentially in the fall. And we still are averaging 1,000 deaths a day in this country as well.
Did you say the good news was spring 2022?
No, I'm sorry. I meant to say we were wanting the spring earlier.
That's like the bad news.
Yes, the bad news is that we have to wait basically another 6 months to return to the quote-unquote normalcy. So basically the life you're living right now, get used to it because you're going to experience this at least until spring of next year, according to Dr. Fauci.
There is no, you know what, Dr. Adalja, who we were just mentioning, who I was interviewing on Wake Up with Cheddar, he said COVID's going to be here forever. It's going to be here in 10 years. It's going to be here in 20 years. We're still dealing with mutations from the Spanish flu back from 1918. You know, that's our flu virus that we get.
100%, Jill.
We are going to have to figure out how to live with this thing. And it's hard. By the way, interestingly, some new studies have found that those plastic barriers that we see in restaurants, hair salons, even in some schools, not really effective at preventing the spread of the virus and may actually be making things worse. And that is because they prevent proper airflow and maybe give people this false sense of security.
Jill, you have to feel for businesses who did everything they possibly could during the pandemic to stay open, if that meant less people inside of their shops. All of the money that they spent on these plastic dividers, which, by the way, these plastic dividers, not cheap whatsoever. These are hundreds of dollars that these things cost. So you have to think these businesses that were basically already like losing money already because they couldn't have tons of people inside their stores are wasting all of this money on these plastic dividers that they were being told was important for them to do to keep the COVID cases down.
Baker, the San Francisco Chronicle, they have a story that's actually going viral, and restaurants in that area are reporting fewer patrons going in and dining because of the Delta variant. And you understand it, right? I mean, it's scary. This new variant just spread so much quicker than the others.
Well, Jill, on top of that, again, we have to stress the breakthrough cases are still relatively small, but there still are breakthrough cases, which is leading to this uncertainty, especially given the fact that if you are vaccinated and you're still catching COVID, you're still essentially having to quarantine. Luckily, you're not, the severe hospitalizations and deaths are incredibly small if you've been vaccinated. But Jill, this is going to put a huge wrench in so many things that people were expecting to do for the fall. We, under the assumption at the start of the summer, we were getting our lives back. People started planning vacations again. I have weddings I was planning to go to in the fall. I wanted to go visit my family for the first time for the holidays. Who now knows if you're able to do all of that, especially given the fact that if Dr. Fauci is saying normalcy is not happening till spring of next year, now everybody's life basically gets back put on hold again.
July 4th. That was what Biden had said. Independence from the virus. Okay, let's talk about what's happening right now in Afghanistan. President Biden expected to announce as soon as today whether he plans to extend the August 31st deadline to get Americans and allies out of the country. He is reportedly being pressured by members of the G7. The G7 is actually meeting today. The Taliban says, though, not so fast. There are actually going to be consequences if the U.S. stays past the deadline. And part of the problem here is that the State Department, at least in terms of Americans who are actually in Afghanistan, they don't really know how many Americans are left. So it was estimated that there were about 10 to 15,000 Americans there when the evacuations first started. One of the reasons it's hard to assess is because Americans technically would have to register with the embassy when they arrive and then deregister when they leave. But a lot of Americans don't do that. When is the last time if you've been out, obviously Afghanistan's a little different because it's a war zone.
But even Europe, Jill.
When you travel abroad, have you ever even thought to register with an embassy?
No, never, ever. And to be honest, I wouldn't even know the first steps and the processes to do anything.
Exactly.
So adding to all of this, Jill, there's new fresh reporting this morning coming from the Washington Post saying that the CIA director, President Biden's top spy, met yesterday in private with the leader of the Taliban in an effort to basically get that August 31st deadline extended, because as you mentioned, the Taliban effectively saying that August 31st deadline is a red line. The United States has to be out of Afghanistan by then. But we also are getting some fresh information from the White House this morning about the number of people who have been evacuated. As of 3 a.m. Eastern time this morning, the White House says they've evacuated 21,000 people out of the Kabul airport just within the last 24 hours. They've evacuated 58,000 people over the course of the last 10 days. So the White House still hoping to get between 5,000 and 9,000 people out per day. But time is ticking, Jill, because there's, as you mentioned, only about 6 to 7 days left before that August 31st deadline, and there still is no clue how many people we still need to get out of there. Now, some other big announcements came from Airbnb this morning. Their CEO, Brian Chesky, tweeted out that the Airbnb is going to house about 20,000 Afghan refugees, all for free, and that's going to be at Airbnb properties all throughout the world. Now, Chesky did not specify how much Airbnb is going to spend on these houses or how long these refugees are going to be housed, but so far 48,000 refugees have been evacuated, as I mentioned, according to the U.S., and it's all being paid through contributions to Airbnb.org from Airbnb and Brian Chesky, as well as donors to Airbnb.org's Refugee Fund. Brian Chesky also went out to thank the hosts for providing their homes for all these Afghan refugees, Jill.
More international competition set to kick off in Tokyo. The 16th Summer Paralympic Games begin today. This is just weeks after the 2020 Olympics wrapped. Athletes are going to be under those same COVID-19 protocols and restrictions, so there's a limited number of spectators at each event. NBC Universal is committed to showing 1,200 hours of coverage this year, compared to just 70 hours during Brazil 2016 and just 5.5 hours from London in 2012. Athletes are also going to be getting more prize money for their medals after previously just getting about 1/5 of what their Olympic counterparts received. And Baker, there are already some records being broken. 28 openly LGBTQ athletes competing in the games. That's the most ever.
And that is amazing news, Jill. Yeah, those 28 athletes span over 8 different countries. Most of them are women. There is one out male. We're talking about Lee Pearson. He is an equestrian from Great Britain. 3 athletes apparently consider themselves to be non-binary. But Jill, a great record. This comes after a record number of 185 LGBTQ athletes performed at the Tokyo Games. Now, just like the Tokyo Games, nobody is going to be sitting in the stands at any of the Paralympic Games as well, Jill. Most of the same protocols also still going to be in place when it comes to testing and everything else. But either way, as you mentioned, there has been a lot more interest in the Paralympic Games every year, basically, since the last 10 years or so.
It really is wonderful. And I think you've got to build on that momentum, which is why I think the fact that NBC is going to be airing them is so incredibly important. Okay, some business news here. Vox Media acquiring the cocktail website Punch. It comes amid rumblings that the media company is considering going public either via SPAC or a traditional IPO, or by raising additional funding. Vox would join a media company trend by going public. BuzzFeed set to go public via SPAC later this year. So with the acquisition of Punch, Vox Media looking to venture deeper into its coverage of food and drinks. Of course, Vox owns Eater, one of my favorites. I love Eater.
Oh, I love Eater. Best.
And Vox also owns The Verge, the current event site Vox.com, and then SB Nation, which is focused on sports.
Yeah, Jill, I love the heat map on Eater, so all the more reason I want this pandemic to be over, because I want to start going back to hot restaurants again. But this is really interesting, Jill. Before the pandemic, there was a lot of of concern about how much consolidation you would see of the BuzzFeeds, the Vices, the Voxes. There was potential that you would see all three of those companies merge together and then go public as a way to basically stay profitable. Now things have sort of changed because of the pandemic, and now you sort of, and because people are able to go public via SPAC now, you can basically have somebody write the check and basically get you publicly funded as a result of that now. So as a result, you're seeing all these sort of big mergers and acquisitions happen, which is why you saw HuffPo get acquired by BuzzFeed recently. Vice has made a lot of acquisitions. Now you're seeing, as you mentioned, Vox acquiring Punch, which is now sort of going to be ingrained into the Eater platform as well. And look, now all these companies can now go public via a SPAC now and keep themselves going.
And speaking of, I guess, food, this is our transition here, Baker. A study out earlier this week, which was talking about how to achieve healthier and more environmentally stable diets, had quite the shocker. Apparently, eating one beef hot dog on a bun can take approximately 36 minutes off the end of your life. Researchers say it's because of the detrimental effects of processed meat. The study found that foods like fruits, non-starchy vegetables, and cooked grains add minutes to the end of one's life. I get the point of what they're trying to do here, but it seems like, where in the world are you getting this 36 minutes from?
Jill, these numbers are so arbitrary and so crazy. Okay, so a chicken wing, apparently, one chicken wing takes 3.5 minutes off your life because of all the sodium that's in all of that. You mentioned the hot dogs, the 35 minutes that gets taken off your life. Interestingly, though, the opposite direction, they say peanut butter and jelly sandwiches increased your life by 33 minutes. Foods like salted peanuts, baked salmon, rice, those gave you 10 to 15 minutes added to your life as well. Now, researchers basically concluded at the end of the day, Joe, which is so crazy, if you just swap out 10% of your daily caloric consumption of beef and processed meats, and you replace those with fruits and vegetables and nuts, you would gain close to 48 minutes to an hour of your life if you just did that 10% swap. Also, your carbon footprint would decrease by 1/3 as a result also. But Jill, listen, I talk on a daily basis how much 95% of my caloric intake is chicken fingers. So you have to think, I have lost years, if not hours, of my life. You have to think those people at the Coney Island Hot Dog Eating Festival have lost years off of their life also. So just crazy.
And then I was going to save this story for tomorrow, but it kind of fits in, and we're not going overly long, which is shocking.
Okay.
I thought you'd find this interesting. There was an article in New York Magazine's blog, Grub Street, which I'm sure you're a fan of, as am I. Whole milk mounts its triumphant comeback. Hot girls are ditching the alternatives and going back to the basics. And they basically talk about how a lot of people are drinking whole milk, regular milk, cow's milk, instead of almond milk and oat milk. And I know, you are a fan, of course, of Oatly.
Yep.
What do you think? I'm laying this on you hot right now. You haven't heard this before. But I'm curious what you think, and if you think that maybe regular milk is going to make a comeback.
Jill, it possibly will. And it's interesting that it's whole milk of the decisions out there. It's not, non-fat milk. It's not 2%.
Well, because whole milk just tastes so much better than
Well, of course,
milk.
Because you get the full fat in there,
delicious.
Jill. I mean, you might as well just be drinking half and half at that particular point, which, by the way, I'm also a fan of also. You're absolutely right. I am a fan of the milk alternatives. Oat milk in particular is a big one. I think oat and almond are actually the two biggest milk substitutes out there, which has been a really big detriment to the Dairy Farmers Association in this country. So much so that the Got Milk campaign is actively redoing more of those campaigns to encourage more people to drink whole milk in particular more than any other milk. So I do find that interesting. But Jill, nothing's going to get me to move away from oat milk. I love me some oat milk. It is honestly, as a former barista also, oat milk is the best milk alternative when it comes to a frothy, good latte, because oat milk steams better than most of the milk alternatives out there.
Well, that is some news you can use.
Yes,
Baker.
exactly. No, so if you're going to get a latte and you don't want real milk, always get oat milk. It is the best one out there.
Okay, Baker, as always, thank you for coming on the podcast. Hope Carlo is enjoying his vacay, and that is what you need to know for Tuesday, August 24th.